Hello and welcome to the 2020 Data Standards webinar. We are here today to learn about the changes that are being made in HMIS starting October 1st, 2019. This is happening because the 2020 Data Standards were released by HUD. My name is Lindsay LaGrange and I'm the training coordinator at Texas Homeless Network. Today we're going to start off with a few housekeeping items and then we will begin to walk through all of the changes happening. First, I wanted to note that the changes you see in this webinar today are not in HMIS just yet, so we don't expect you to leave today and start entering in any of these new data elements immediately. Again, these changes will be required by HUD starting Tuesday, October 1st, 2019, so that's the date that our data collection process needs to include the changes we're going to learn about today. We wanted to give you some time to get comfortable with these changes so that you're ready come October 1st. We're actually in the process of creating new updated work groups in HMIS, and they're going to look a little bit different, but not too different from the work groups that we currently use. We plan to roll these work groups out on Friday, October 4th. Victoria Lopez is going to talk a little bit more about this later on in the webinar, so keep an ear out for that. Speaking of which, I'm joined today by the rest of the Texas Homeless Network HMIS team, including Antonio, Victoria Lopez, and our newest HMIS member, Marissa Ortega. The team is going to help me break down what changes we're going to see in the site, who they affect, and we'll also dive into what these will look like in the system. Really quickly, if you're interested in reading the newest version of the data standards yourself, they are available on the HUD Exchange website under the resources section. Since the document is quite lengthy and rather dense, we are only going to walk through the parts that directly affect our HMIS users today. There are two types of changes you're going to see in HMIS. The first type affects all HMIS users, meaning the change is going to appear on all workflows regardless of your funding source or project type. The second type of change only affects specific HMIS users depending on what funding sources they have and also what project types they have. So some of these may apply to you and others may not. We're going to start with the changes that affect all HMIS users regardless of what work group they're in or what funding source their agency has. The first change we're going to look at is called prior living situation. As I just mentioned, this change affects all HMIS users. As the second bullet says, this is a revision which has been renamed to prior living situation and has been assigned to the same living situation list as destination and current living situation. There's also new options on the list, including host home non-crisis. So what does all of this mean? On the Universal Data Assessment page, which is a page you've all seen in the HMIS workflow, there's a drop-down menu that is currently called Type of Residence. The small print above this drop-down menu currently says, identify the type of residence and length of stay at that residence just prior to program admission. So since we're asking about the client's prior living situation, HUD has renamed this data element to prior living situation. So here you can see that the change reflected in the new workflow. Prior living situation has taken the place of type of residence. If you were to click on that drop-down menu, all of the menu options will be the same except for a few small changes. So option no longer on the list, you'll see interim housing will no longer be on the list of prior living situation, and host home is now a new option on the list. If you're wondering what exactly host homes are, they are a type of housing for homeless youth. The definition of a host home, according to HUD, is host homes are a flexible and cost-effective model for providing stable housing and supports to homeless youth. Host homes offer a home-like, non-institutional environment rooted in the community. If you're not sure if your community offers host homes to homeless youth, chances are they don't. But if you do find that this option is relevant to the situation your client is in, then you have the option to use it. The next change we're going to look at applies to the destination field that you see when exiting an enrollment. Just like the last change we looked at, this data element affects everyone regardless of their project funding source. This change is very similar to the last change, except that this data element's name is going to remain the same. So destination is currently what it's called in HMIS, and it will continue to be called that after October 1st. The responses or drop-down menu options are what's being updated with this data element. As you all know, when you're exiting your client from an enrollment, the first question you're asked in the exit workflow is the client's exit destination. Just like with prior living situation, interim housing is no longer an option and host home non-crisis is a new option. So you'll see here, if you were to begin exiting this client from their enrollment, you would see these drop-down options on that destination drop-down menu. Just like prior living situation, interim housing is no longer an option on this list, but host home is now an option. Okay, now we're going to get into the changes you'll see that only affect certain funding sources or project types. So some of these changes may not apply to you, but please don't step away if we talk about one that doesn't affect you. We will probably cover a change that does affect your specific funding source soon, and we have a few important announcements at the end of this webinar which apply to all HMIS users. So these next three changes only affect our PATH-funded projects. PATH stands for Projects for Assistance in Transition from Homelessness. It's a federal grant program that provides assistance to individuals who are homeless or at risk of homelessness and have serious mental illness. If this is all new to you and you're not sure if your program is funded by PATH, chances are it's not, and these changes don't apply to you. These changes should look familiar if you joined us last week on the PATH and HMIS webinar. The first change being made to the PATH process is the requirement of a new service in HMIS for each service granted to the client. As we explained in that webinar last week, this was previously not required for PATH providers, but highly encouraged to record each instance of a PATH-funded service provided to a PATH-enrolled client. But that's no longer the case. Now it's required for you to record each instance of each PATH-funded service provided to the client. The second data standard change being made to the PATH process is a new option on the drop-down menu for reasons your client was not enrolled in PATH. That new option is called Unable to Locate Client. And finally, the domestic violence assessment is now a required assessment, and it will be a part of all PATH workflows. I've also included a screenshot of that new Unable to Locate Client drop-down menu option. So if you find that your client is not eligible for PATH, you now have this drop-down option to select under reasons the client was not enrolled in PATH. And finally, here is a screenshot of that required domestic violence assessment, which is now in the workflow as a separate assessment page for Project Start, Update, and Project Exit. Now I'm going to pass things off to Marissa Ortega for our next funding source that will be affected by the 2020 data standards.
Hello everyone, here is a new change for our RHY funded projects. The response option Other has been added along with a text field where you can describe the client's preferred orientation. This question has been a requirement for our RHY funded projects for a while now, but it's still good practice to go back and double check that this question has been collected for all your clients. If a client responded Other in the past or was unsatisfied with the list of options given, this is a good chance to go back and fill in this response with something that reflects the client's preferred orientation. You can find the sexual orientation question in the RHY entry assessment portion of the intake workflow. Here you can click the drop-down menu, select Other, and then describe your client's preferred sexual orientation. That's it for our RHY funded projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. I'll be covering some changes that will be rolled out to SSVF-funded projects. The first change is an addition of new services. So the first new service that's being added is the Rapid Resolution Service. The second one is the Returning Home. And the last one is the Extended Shallow Subsidy Service. Along with these three services, we'll also see an addition of a new referral, and that is the Extended Shallow Subsidy Rental Assistance referral. And the last change that SSVF projects will see is that the domestic violence assessment is now a required assessment in the entry workflow. So I'll go ahead and move on to some screenshots that I've taken of these new services. So here you'll see that I'm in the Services tab, and I'm just looking through the list of services here. So the new SSVF services will be listed under the service group SSVF Funded Services. Next is a screenshot of the new referral that is being added to SSVF programs, and here you'll see that I'm in the Referrals tab, and in the list of referral services you'll see that it is prefixed with SSVF to help you find it in the alphabetical list. Alright, so here's the last screenshot of the domestic violence assessment and its place in the workflow. Here you'll see that it is coming right after the universal data assessment. And here is the questions that they'll be asking you. So the assessment date, whether or not the client has experienced domestic violence, and then the ROI restriction at the end. And those are all of the changes that SSVF programs will see with the new data standards. I'll go ahead and pass on the mic to Victoria.
I'm going to talk to you about the current living situation. This could be considered a new assessment or a new range of elements for multiple funding types and projects. I want you to take note of the specific funding types this affects: COC, ESG, PATH, and RHY. And within those funding types, this new assessment only applies to the street outreach and services only project types. I know some of you are homing in on the coordinated entry project in that list, but that's specifically for HUD-COC funded coordinated entry, which at this point, ours isn't. So if you have ESG street outreach, PATH street outreach or supportive services only, or RHY street outreach, you're going to be directly impacted by this change. The purpose of this data element is to record each contact with people experiencing homelessness by street outreach and other service projects, and to provide information on the number of contacts required to engage the client, as well as to document a current living situation as needed in any applicable project. Record the date and location of each interaction with a client by recording their current living situation. The first current living situation with a client will occur at the same point as project start date and recording of the client's prior living situation. Therefore, this requires a record to be opened in HMIS for the client. What that means is, as soon as you create the intake, as soon as you create that enrollment for the client, HUD's expectation is that you are making one of these current living situation assessments for that client. Refer to guidance in HMIS program manuals for more details. This is what the new assessment will look like in HMIS. This assessment is going to appear in the intake and exit workflow, but it's also going to be accessible outside of the workflow. I want you to take note that based on what you answer for the client's living situation, that first field near the top, you're going to get different questions to answer. For some clients, you may see significantly less questions on this page than what we have here now. The purpose of these additional questions is to record additional housing status information to support the determination of imminent and at risk of homelessness housing statuses based on HUD's definition of homelessness. All street outreach projects, plus the PATH-funded services only project type, are expected to record every contact made with each client by recording their current living situation, including when the project start date, prior living situation, or date of engagement is recorded on the same day. There may or may not be a contact made at project exit. We talked a little bit about how for some clients you may see significantly less questions on this page than what we saw on the previous slide. Well, if you have a PATH-funded project, your data collection requirements are limited to the following fields: place not meant for habitation, emergency shelter, safe haven, other, and worker unable to determine. I'm going to repeat this because I feel like this is a bit of a change from business as usual. Every time you make contact with a client, HUD's expectation is that you are filling out a new current living situation record, which includes making an outreach and engagement service. There is a place at the bottom of this assessment page that allows you to create a contact and engagement service at the same time you're making one of these current living situation records. You're probably already used to making contact and engagement services for your client through the services page. Now you're going to be making that service through this small assessment. One of the last things we're going to talk about are some design changes. The site is going to look a little different than what you're used to. The menus have been flattened out. There are not as many pop-up menus as before. You can see in the client profile menu that there aren't any of these little arrows that when you hover over them you get many pop-out menus. Instead, what we have more of is submenus that will hopefully make finding things a little easier. You'll also notice some changes to the My Case Assignments menu on the home workspace. You should also see that things are spaced out a bit more. Text isn't so cramped. There is also a new reporting workspace where all of our reports now live instead of in the home workspace. There will also be new workgroups for a majority of users that access the system. That workgroup has all the recent design changes, including the most up-to-date forms associated with it. Let's talk a bit more in depth about those workgroups. So we've shown you all of this cool new stuff that's coming really soon. I do want to make clear though that what we've shown you so far is all in the training site right now. It hasn't been synced over to the live site. The changes to the workflow will be in the live site beginning October 1st. The only thing that we're holding off on is the current living situation assessment outside of the workflow. That will be coming to you October 4th. Why are we pushing it back? There are a couple of reasons. First, we want to make sure that we switch everyone over to the new work groups in a way that's the least disruptive to the work that you're doing. So we chose to push it back to a Friday morning. We will put out a reminder before then that from about 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. you won't want to log into the system during that time because we're making the workgroup switch for users. At that point, we will have a short video training available describing the change with the current living situation, and we'll also update our HMIS trainings to make sure that new people being trained for HMIS know how to do the assessment for specific project types and funding sources. On a final note, there are some updates happening on the back end of the system that you as a user will not see, and so you won't have to worry about them. However, we will be reviewing a lot of our HMIS setup data to fill in any missing gaps that we find. We may reach out to individual agencies to ask about things like housing inventory, project setup, grant information, or addresses if we find that we need additional information about those things. That's it for the 2020 Data Standards HMIS webinar. Thanks for watching.